Hi, today I'm going to show you how to track 3D text into your quadcopter footage. Now it's actually pretty straightforward to do now in CS6. The hardest part is probably getting the lighting right and lining things up. But let's see how long this takes, and I hope it all makes sense. So let's come over to our clean footage here. This was shot on a pretty windy day, so I had to warp stabilize it, and I've obviously used the optics compensation to get rid of the fisheye. Check out my other tutorials on how that happens. First thing we need to do here is to track the camera. So we come over to the tracker and hit track camera. That'll do its thing. It's all done. And we go over to the effects now, and we can see that we've got lots of lovely tracking points here all the way through our footage. Now, if you wanted to be really clever, you could have put some cards on the ground down here that would be, good tracking points. But this should be enough for now. So, that looks like a good starting point. Just take those 2, 3, and this one right over here. And maybe this one, and this one, and this one. Okay, that's probably enough now. Let's check that out. So we're going to right click and we're going to go create shadow catcher, camera, and light. There we go. So it's done those for us. We've got all our keyframes on the camera. And we've got our shadow catcher with the material options set to accept shadows only. And then there's our light. Now our light is... Where is our light? Can't see the light anywhere. So let's reposition that so it's in a similar position to where the sun is. So it needs to go way, way back. Let's set that to like 11,000. There it is. Okay. Move him up. We want to check out this shadow catcher. We're going to put the text somewhere around here, so we're going to move it forward a bit. And what we want to check is that that lines up with that little bush on the ground the whole way through the move. Yeah, that's really good. Now you can move this around a little bit if it isn't quite right, but on this occasion, it's done me proud. So let's add in our text. Right. Now we need to make that 3D, copy the position of our shadow catcher, paste it on there. You can see it's absolutely tiny, so let's scale this right up. 850 or something like that. Yeah, okay, that's better. And then we'll move this up in 3D space. And we need to line this up now with our camera move so that we're actually flying through the letters. And I think we'll probably have to move it that way a bit. And then we'll come over to the point when it actually goes through. And... okay, yeah, it's coming. Needs to come up a bit. And go right a bit. Now I'm just going to tweak the position of this until I get it exactly right. So we'll skip forward to when that's complete. So here we have it. Now I don't know if you can see this, but the camera track isn't quite perfect. We've got a few little jiggles and wiggles as the camera goes through that text there. But not to worry, that's not a problem. We've already got our focal length right and the relative position sorted out. So all we need to do is just remove all these keyframes. Because we're just moving in a straight line, we can get rid of all of these keyframes here. Right up to the point where we fly through the letters. hit delete, get rid of those. Now on these start and end keyframes, you're going to need to change the keyframe interpolation so that the spatial interpolation is linear. Otherwise you'll have some easing on that move, which will look a bit weird. Obviously, if you were flying your quadcopter or drone in a less regular fashion, then you wouldn't be able to do such a simple fix here. But, you know, on a day that it wasn't so windy and you didn't have to use warp stabilization, you probably wouldn't need to remove the keyframes. It's definitely been more successful in the past. Okay, so that should now be nice and smooth and it's still in position. All good. Right, this is where it gets interesting. We need to now switch over from the classic 3D renderer to our ray traced renderer. You do that here, and in the options, while we're working on the basic setup, we need to change this quality down to 1 to give us the quickest render times. I'm even going to lower this to 1/4 just to make it quicker while I'm also recording the screen as well. Okay, so come over to our type, and we'll see here now we've got some geometry options as well as material options, which we'll bring up in a sec. But to begin with, we want to set the bevel to convex. Going to turn this down to 1.5, and let's zoom in a bit closer, and then we'll turn the extrusion depth up to a nice chunky 3D text. Okay, that's great. Now we need to rotate the text layer a little because it's a bit flat at the moment. Yeah, that's looking better. Maybe go this way a little so it isn't quite so flat on. Yeah, that's cool. Now, you'll see that although the light matches realistically relatively where the sun is, it actually spoils the look a bit because we're not getting any light here on these edges. So I don't think that we need to worry about trying to be too realistic. We could move this over to get a better look on the type. Get it right in the middle there. Yeah, much happier with that. Okay, so let's have a look at the material options now. At the moment, it's looking very dark. We want to get some reflections in there. So I'm going to return the reflection intensity up to 90. We don't want them to be quite so sharp, so I'm going to turn that down to 50. Okay, that's looking better. Now you can see it's actually cutting into the shadow catcher down here. So what we want to do is in our shadow catcher material options, we're going to turn appears in reflections to off, and that way we don't see any of that in the type. Okay, so let's get the next level of this going. We're going to need to have an environment layer set up so that the reflections in the object match the reflections that you would see in real life. So I'm going to duplicate our footage. I'm going to turn off this effect here, and I'm going to right click and select environment layer. And now we see that reflected into our type. Now it's not looking quite right white there, so let's give it a bit more of a kind of golden color over here and make it more golden. Okay, cool. So the last thing we need to do is obviously the light here is not going to cast a shadow onto our shadow catcher. The sky would be acting like a huge, great big softbox on the light here. So we need to have some sort of ambient light coming down to create an area of darkness on the ground. I mean, we could just create a dark, feathered solid, but for the sake of example, let's just try and do it in a more realistic way. So that's obviously far too small at the moment. We'll just scale that up a bit. And we'll then create a new light. Spotlight this time. And yeah, shadow darkness 50% with really high diffusion. And press OK. So now it's totally lighting that up, but we want to move it into the position of our type and then go up high, really high. So I'm going to hit P on the keyboard to bring up the position of the type, copy that, paste it onto the light here, and then we're going to push this right up in Y space. So let's go to P, and I'm going to put this at like -8,000, whatever. Okay, there it is. Now, we need to check that on the material options here, we're going to cast shadows on, and there is our shadow. Now, because we're in draft mode, the diffusion that we've set on the light is not showing up in that shadow, so we're going to have to come up to a higher quality to be able to see that. Click on the options here, and we'll go up to 2 now. I don't know if you can hear this, but my computer is beginning to really struggle with the amount of processing it has to do. Okay, so there's that. Now we're obviously viewing at a very low percentage, so I'm going to increase that to full so we can get an idea of what a still looks like at full quality, then render out and we'll watch it back, and hopefully we'll all be happy. Yeah, the type is still a little too dark, so what I'm going to do is come down to my environment and I'm going to add a new curves adjustment layer. Going to bring up the reds a bit. Bring up the brightness a bit. And I'm going to change the shadow darkness because it's too dark. Let's bring that down to like 30. Just a couple of things before we render it. We need to stop this environment layer from playing so it's just as still, because otherwise these reflections are just going to go crazy. So I'm going to press Apple and Alt and T on this layer here. Put in a keyframe and delete the keyframes at the end and the beginning. So that will now be a still, that environment layer. And we're going to turn on the motion blur on here. And we're now ready to render. So let's jump back in once that's complete. So there it is. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with the results. Hope you were able to follow that and it's useful for your films. Do check out my other tutorials, and I look forward to reading your comments. Thanks again. Just as a quick footnote, if you find this rendering process is far too slow for you, then I highly recommend Video Copilot's Element 3D. It's a lot quicker and just as easy to use.